I've had a few different finance interviews, whether it's banking, private equity, hedge fund, or some other finance career. And one of the most common questions that came up for me is pitch me something or talk to me about a business that you thought was interesting. And that's because if you can walk someone through a well thought out business proposal, that's one of the most common ways to show that you have a genuine interest in the field of finance. You don't necessarily have to be in private equity or hedge fund to resonate with the idea of evaluating a business model. And so, even my investment banking interviews, one of the most common questions I got was pitch me something or walk me through a stock. Now, I personally think this is probably the most important question just because if you execute this one properly, you can a lot of times make a really good impression on just this question alone. And sometimes you won't even get asked technicals if you answer this question well, because a well thought out answer to this establishes a very deep technical knowledge and also just shows that you have rationally thought about a business model to the extent where they understand that you, one, have genuine interest in the space, and two, are probably capable enough to learn and do well in the space. So in this video, what I'm going to do is walk you through an example of a really good business model that I would use whenever asked this question. And this is one that I'll walk you through exactly what are the benefits of this business and also what are the risks. Now, the risks is a very important part because you want to show the interviewer that you've also really thought out the potential bear case in these scenarios. So it's not just you promoting the business. That's really the critical thinking aspect here is you have to look at the downside as well. And then at the end of this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to just efficiently pitch this in less than a minute to anyone who asks you the question of pitch me a stock, walk me through a business, which you will surely get. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to go over what I think one of the best businesses here in America is, and that's going to be Copart. The ticker symbol is CPRT. This is a public company. This is, quite frankly, possibly the best business in America, and it's a junkyard. Really simply put, Copart runs online auctions for totaled cars. So walking through the life of a wreck, you get in an accident, your insurance company, Geico, Progressive, State Farm, looks at the repair estimate and says this costs more to fix the car than it's actually worth. So that's going to end up in a total loss. They're going to cut you a check, and now they own a salvaged car that they don't even really want. So this is where Copart comes in. They're going to tow the car to one of their roughly 250 storage yards. They're going to photograph it, list it online on their auction platform, and sell it to the highest bidder. The buyers aren't necessarily who you'd expect. It's a pretty wide pool. So there's dismantlers who are just going to take the pieces out of the car and sell the parts. There's rebuilders, there's used part dealers, and there's really actually also a massive base of international exporters. So a flooded Camry in Houston might actually end up being rebuilt and drive around Nigeria, Ukraine, UAE. So really there's a lot of different possibilities here. The key detail is Copart almost never owns the car. And that's what you want to make sure you say in an interview. They don't actually own the asset. They don't own any of that. They don't get into buying the car. It's a consignment model. So the insurance company owns the vehicle. Copart takes the fee from the seller and the buyer. And then ultimately they're running a marketplace is really what the business becomes. So it's really, think about it as a toll booth. Every wrecked car in America has to pass through one of two companies. Copart is pretty much in a duopoly. They are the first company, and then there's also another company as well. But by and large, there's a good argument that Copart is the biggest and best competitor rather than the other company that they're going against. So now we're going to have to talk about the moats. And this is what really any interviewer is going to want to hear. They're going to want to hear what makes the business different and why it's difficult to compete with a company like Copart. So why can't someone actually just compete with a business like Copart? There's really three layers. One, it's the land. Copart owns over 20,000 acres of land, and this is zoned for vehicle storage near major population centers. That would be extremely difficult to actually replicate today, just given all the red tape, laws, and regulations around these popular cities. So accidents happen where people live. Towing is expensive, so the yards have to be close to cities. And if you even want to try getting a brand new salvage yard permitted next to an American city in 2026, good luck. The neighbors will fight it. The environmental review will take years. The city council will pretty much laugh you out of the room. Nobody wants 50,000 wrecked cars next door to them. So Copart has pretty much spent decades assembling the asset base that's functionally very difficult to recreate. This is a real barrier to entry, and you can think about it similar to the towing industry, the railroad industry. It's very difficult to set up tracks in the railroad industry to compete, and that's single-handedly, by and large, a big reason about why that business model was so impressive, and that's why Warren Buffett liked that business model, railroads. Well, it's not the exact same here, but you get something very close to it, just given the infrastructure that Copart has built. So the stress test here is a competitor with unlimited capital would still have a very difficult time rebuilding something like this, just given how long it would take to get that many acres of valuable land to use for storage next to very populated cities. Now the second mode, network effects. So this is a marketplace, and marketplaces get stronger the bigger they get. You have to think about what each side wants. So you have the sellers, which are the big insurance carriers. They want one thing. They want the highest possible value on every totaled car. The buyers want the deepest possible inventory to bid on. They want options. Copart spent decades building a global buyer base, especially international exporters, and more bidders per car means higher prices. Higher recovery rates win more insurance contracts. More contracts means more inventory, which attracts even more buyers. It's kind of like a wheel that just goes in circles. It's a snowball that goes down a hill and gets bigger and bigger. The industry structure seals itself, really. Again, it's a duopoly. So Copart and one competitor, IAA, which is now owned by RV Global, control essentially the whole market. For a national insurance carrier, switching providers means replumbing towing. You have to change logistics, title processing across 50 states. It's pretty painful, and it's not worth it when Copart's already getting you the best prices. So the second point that you have to mention in the interview, which is what we're capping on now, is customer stickiness. It's just really difficult to switch. So switching costs are high if you're using a marketplace like this, and ultimately you don't have many options. So Copart's in a really good place. So the third point to really capture here is the cyclicality of the business. So, or in this case, it's not very cyclical. This business is going to grow in good times and bad. Now, it might take a haircut in bad times, but the business will still produce in a bad time. It's not a very cyclical business. So what you'd say in the interview here for the third piece that we're talking about is it grows in good times, and even in bad times, the business can still grow. There's not too many businesses that you can say both to. Really, for a lot of the other businesses that you make investments for, you just have to hope that in bad times, the downturn is not as bad. Now, in every single pitch that you talk about, you do have to spend some time talking about the numbers. That kind of shows you've spent at least a bit of time going over the financials, and you do have a grasp on what the financials look like. So the one thing we can quickly talk about here is the operating margins. The operating margins for this business are in the mid to high 30s. That's pretty much software company territory for a business that tows wrecked cars. The second piece here is returns on capital are north of 20%. Remember, it's consignment, so Copart doesn't buy inventory, they don't carry inventory risk, and its big capital expenditure is land. So that's really what they're spending their money on. But land is an asset that appreciates instead of depreciating, so that completely changes their financial statements. So now you got to think about also part 3 here, which is cash dynamics. Copart collects the buyer's money before it remits the seller's share. Other people's money fund the float is essentially what's going on here. There's no debt on the current business today. So the business compounds on its own cash flow and pricing power without the fight. Copart's fees scale with vehicle values. When used car prices rise, Copart's revenue per car rises automatically. They get price increases without ever sending anyone a price increase letter. So the way that you would summarize this in an interview is going to be you have a business with mid 30% operating margins, 20% or higher returns on capital, no inventory risk, no debt. You have land that appreciates, so that's really CapEx that's actually appreciating, and then the financials are the moat that shows up in the numbers. Now, this part you have to mention in the interview, and this is what separates a good answer from a bad answer, the actual risk here. What is the downside? So not pretty much. Every single company that you have looked at or that has ever enter the table as an investment here, whether it's the public, private markets, they all have a downside. There's a risk to every business. For this one, in my opinion, what the largest risk here is going to be is autonomous vehicles. So the mitigant to this issue would be that this is going to take a long time to replace, autonomous vehicles are going to take a long time to replace the cars on the road today. The average vehicle on the road today is 12 years old. So the curve that's going to look like into the future is a lot further out, in my opinion, than most people think. Now, we're starting to see increased adoption rates of autonomous vehicles, but with that being said, you can still recognize the business can still perform well even into the next decade before the autonomous vehicle issue actually becomes a big problem. That same technology making cars safer is also making them more expensive to repair. So all those sensors in autonomous vehicles and all those gadgets that need to go into the cars, again, makes them more expensive to repair, which raises the total loss frequency. So that threat can also be a tailwind, at least in the short term. Now, the second risk here is customer concentration. A handful of giant insurers supply the volume. So what if they squeeze fees or bring salvage in-house? The counter is it's a duopoly. So the carriers care far more about recovery rates than fee levels. And no insurer wants to run a global auction marketplace and 250 junkyards. They've had decades to vertically integrate it and still haven't done it. So there's no real reason, nothing to point to that shows the insurance companies would really change their business model now and become more efficient in running their own junkyards and running their own auction marketplace. Lastly, now let's summarize this. Let's take it all back. So you have to understand this business from all these angles, but then that's not exactly what you would say in an interview. So in an interview, you'd have to give them a concise, neat answer when they ask you to walk them through a business or pitch them through a business. And this should typically be done in less than a minute and a half, maybe. And then from there, they're going to go ahead and ask their questions, which you can then get into each of the parts I was talking about. So how do you do this in a minute and a half? Well, I'll go ahead and give you the template. So the way I would phrase this is, if I could own one business forever, it's Copart. It's a fee-based toll booth on totaled cars, consignment model, so no inventory risk. The moat has 3 layers. 20,000 acres of irreplaceable land near cities that could never get permitted today, 2-sided network effects in a duopoly market, and demand that grows secularly because modern cars are easier to total, while holding up in recessions because used parts demand is counter-cyclical. The results in the financials end up looking like mid-30s operating margins, 20+% returns on capital, and no debt. In the main bear case, autonomous vehicles is decades away at fleet turnover speed, while the same technology actually raises total loss frequencies to date. So in the short term, it's a tailwind to the business. As soon as you say all that, you gotta shut up. You have to now pretty much give them the chance to ask a follow-up question to see where they want to go and push back on any of that and learn more about the business proposal. Sometimes it might even actually just go past that. I think that explanation might even be sufficient enough to show that you have a decent grasp on what actually drives an investment, and you've thought about potentially the risks here as well. But from there, they can go ahead and ask the question, which you guys can then focus on specific parts of the pitch from there. That's the pitch. So if you go over it enough times and also really think about this from multiple different angles, you can really anticipate any question that an interviewer would ask of you. And a pitch like this really gives you the chance to show your investment understanding, but also genuine interest in the space. So again, I said it at the beginning of the interview, but I do think this is probably the most important question. And I used to get excited when interviewers would ask me this, because I knew it would give me enough to talk about to show technical knowledge, genuine interest, and overall understanding of the space. So that's all I got for now. Catch us on the next one.